The dropship shuddered violently as it tore through Earth's fractured atmosphere, its hull glowing ruby red against the torrid re-entry fire. I, Zircon, reconnaissance trooper of the Supreme Collective, held fast to the bulkhead straps, mandibles quivering with a mixture of anticipation and what your species might call dread. Above the roar of the engines, I heard only the rhythmic pulsing of my internal sensors, calibrated to detect atmospheric toxins, biological signatures, and structural weaknesses. None of those readings could have prepared me for what awaited. Below, when the ramp finally hissed open, a blast of acrid air struck me like a physical blow. The sulfurous scent of industrial fires mingled with something fouler: sweat, fear, and something dead. My optical rays adjusted, revealing a landscape of jagged ruins bathed in an eerie orange twilight. Skyscrapers that once reached for the heavens lay toppled like discarded matchsticks. Highways snaked through the rubble, their asphalt peeled away like spent scabs. Somewhere distant, a siren wailed a desperate plea that no one would answer. Our orders were clear: observe human warfare, collect tactical intelligence, and, if circumstances allowed, intervene to prevent total planetary collapse. Yet all I felt was the weight of what I might become, the instrument of yet another conqueror. I was programmed for detachment, but the raw desolation before me seared through every protocol. First contact: a squad of human irregulars emerged from a cloud of dust, Akvariant rifles raised in trembling hands. Their uniforms, once crisp, were tattered tatters, stained with mud, blood, and soot. The tallest among them leveled his weapon at my visor, voice trembling. "Identify yourself." His accent, thick and unplaceable, carried a despair I had never catalogued. I activated the universal translator and recited our mission credentials. Moments stretched into eternities as they exchanged glances. At length, a grizzled woman, scar across her cheek like a trophy slashed by war, lowered her rifle. "You're not another army," she spat. "Just tell me why you're here before I change my mind." Thus began our fragile liaison. We traded ration packs for water purification tablets. In return, I shared encrypted maps of insurgent strongholds. Communication was stilted. My attempts at humor fell flat. Her curt nods spoke volumes of skepticism. Yet amid the charred wreckage, a mutual recognition blossomed. Two sides perched on the brink of annihilation, each driven by instinct to survive. The Ashen City rendezvous point lay within what the humans called Sector 37, a devastated quarter, once known for its sprawling industrial foundries. A half-collapsed factory now served as our makeshift command post. Inside, conveyor belts hung suspended like broken bones, and rusted vats emitted plumes of acrid steam. Human engineers had strung up salvaged floodlights, their garish beams dancing across graffiti-scarred walls. Slogans like "No More Blood" and "Who Profits" were scrawled alongside fractured murals of children clutching oxygen masks. At a battered table of reclaimed steel plates, I interfaced with Corporal Rhea Malik, the Coalition's field commander. Her eyes, rimmed with fatigue, scanned my data link output as she traced ruined supply lines and failed peace treaties. "This war," she muttered, voice hoarse, "wasn't always like this. We had oil, agriculture, hope. Then the atmosphere belt collapsed. Climate shifted overnight, crops died, rivers ran toxic, and the great powers turned on each other for the scraps." I uploaded satellite feeds from my craft, images of dried riverbeds, poisoned aquifers, and the tilted skeletons of toppled dams. Her jaw clenched. "They fought over water necks," she said. "We're the leftovers." I recorded her words, though I sensed my report to Central Command risked sanitizing her pain into sterile bullet points. Nightfall and the first strike. When night fell, the temperature plummeted. In lieu of celestial bodies most long obscured by the perpetual haze, the humans ignited flares that painted the ruins in ghostly blues and greens. By infrared scans, I could see more than 30 combatants moving in tight formations, mortar teams, scout units, and shock infantry armed with electromagnetic pulse grenades. At 2:14 local time, the raiders struck. I activated defensive turrets I'd rigged to our position, their microlasers cutting through the smoky gloom with crystalline precision. The humans responded with suppressive fire, tracer rounds arching like fiery comets. The factory walls shuddered under explosive impacts, steel girders bent and groaned. From my vantage point on an elevated catwalk, I observed subtle human tactics, feints into the east corridor, flanking maneuvers through a collapsed loading bay, and relentless harassment to draw attention from their primary assault on the cinderblock junction. Their coordination despite minimal communication gear spoke of hard-earned discipline. Suddenly, a massive shockwave ripped through the compound. A misfired experimental railgun round detonated against a support column, collapsing half the ceiling. Debris rained down. I felt concussive aftershocks in my thoracic cavity. Alarms blared. Human medics scrambled to cradle wounded soldiers with limbs shredded beyond recognition. Another convulsing as sedative darts barely slowed the spasms. I shared my nanobot injector with Corporal Malekith's healing gel sealing cavities almost instantly. She shot me a fleeting look of gratitude before barking orders to evacuate survivors. In that moment, I realized the binding thread of warfare, across species, across galaxies. Pain begets pain, but compassion, no matter how scarce, can shape its own kind of victory. Reflections beneath the Starslater. When the fighting subsided, I climbed atop the rubble to gaze through the perforated roof at the murky sky. No constellations remained, just a perpetual smudge of orange and gray cloud, lit by distant lightning storms. I recorded a final log entry for the night. Observation 047A. Humans exhibit paradoxical resilience. Their technological regressions, due to resource scarcity, are offset by an adaptive, improvisational combat style. Emotional bonds evident in their protective aid to wounded comrades may serve as entry points for diplomatic outreach. My sensors detected a faint warmth. Behind me, Corporal Malek, cloaked in a blood-stained poncho. She offered a tin mug filled with tepid, purified water. "You don't have to pretend you're all-knowing," she said softly. "Just to see us." I paused, mandibles clicking in what could be considered a nod. "I will," I replied, voice resonating through the translator, and as I sipped the bitter liquid, I truly acknowledged that my mission had shifted. No longer were we detached observers. We were part of their story now, and whatever came next, the echoes of this first night would forever shape the course of two worlds entwined in war. The world had split itself along a fault of fire and frost, north of the equatorial wastelands, volcanically heated air met Arctic winds, and in that crucible, humanity had carved its fiercest battlefield. I accompanied Corporal Mei-Ling of the Western Coalition, her designation White Fox, whispered among her comrades, for the way she hunted through snow and steam. As we navigated the ice-slicked ramparts of Trenches Delta 3, dawn's frozen breath before the sun could rise, a biting chill settled into every layer of our armor. My external sensors registered temperatures plunging to -20°C, but the humans seemed only marginally inconvenienced. They wrapped themselves in patched thermal cloaks scavenged from crashed supply drops, their breath erupting as vaporous plumes. Mei-Ling moved ahead of me, each footstep crackling through brittle snow. Her sniper rifle, a custom-modified railgun, hung in a sling across her back, the barrel iced over like glass. "Keep low," she murmured. "Thermal scopes there will pick us off if we climb the parapet." She pointed to a ridge only 50 meters away, where enemy combatant soldiers of the Eastern Dominion hovered in sensor-equipped exosuits. Their mechanical joints hissed as they paced, scanning the distance. I adjusted my own thermal filter to blend with Mei-Ling's personal signature code. The warmth of her body and the cold of mine merged into a faint, erratic heat blob, a ghost scan that flickered on Dominion radars. In theory, in practice, I prayed the algorithms interpreted a single fluctuating heat source, not to discrete shapes. The first raid at 05 for 8 hours, under Mei-Ling's signaled count. Our squad launched the raid. We surged forward, low and fast. Ashen steam rose from fissures in the trench floor, obscuring our silhouettes. Mei-Ling slithered to a vantage point beside a jagged spire of basalt. I covered her flank, targeting electroshock grenades at the Dominion's sensor posts. Sparks erupted as the grenades detonated, their EMP pulses disabling cams and motion detectors. A sharp crack rang out, an enemy scout firing a carbon fiber sniper rifle, its projectile shearing through the steam. The round struck my left shoulder module, denting the armor and sending a white-hot sting through my neural cluster. I winced. activated my auto-repair nanits, and steadied my aim just as Mei Ling squeezed a railgun trigger. The slug tore through the scout's exosuit, extinguishing his thermal signature in a single, silent moment. Behind me, the rest of the human squad swept in. They carried makeshift flamethrowers, crude but effective, spraying sheets of fire that turned icy walls into steaming caverns. Enemy infantry abandoned their positions, retreating toward a bunkered entrance. With an explosive charge and a fusillade of tracer fire, we collapsed the tunnel mouth, burying a dozen Dominion soldiers in shattered basalt. When the echoes faded, the air smelled of ozone, charred rock, and ozone again, each inhalation a reminder of the volatile peace we carved through violence. Between blasts in the lull that followed, I watched Mei Ling sit cross-legged on a fractured ledge, cleaning her rifle's barrel with methodical precision. Her black hair was braided tight, frost crystals clinging at the ends like diamond beads. She worked silently, lips moving in a human counting rhythm I could not decode. "Why do you keep that rifle so clean?" I finally asked, voice modulated through the translator. Without looking up, she paused. "If you can't trust your weapon, how can you trust your own hands? Besides," she tapped the barrel, "you never know when you'll need every ounce of accuracy you can get." I recorded her words as tactical note 10 to be, but my sensors detected a tremor within her, an unspoken weight of responsibility. Over the next 2 hours, our field medics treated frostbite, heat stroke from steam vents, and dozens of minor shrapnel wounds. The conflict had sapped not only resources, but morale. One soldier, Private Havelock, sat shivering under an infrared lamp, tears frozen on his cheeks as he refused painkillers. Mei Ling knelt beside him, wrapping him in an extra thermal blanket. "You'll laugh about this someday," she said, voice gentle. "Right now, just breathe." I felt an unfamiliar pull in my neural pathways, a budding empathy. To witness humans caring for one another under fire revealed facets of their spirit no data chart could illustrate. Nightfall ambushes, dusk bled into a violet dusk. The Dominion launched a counterattack from hidden alcoves above our trench line. Mortar shells screamed down in arcs of phosphorescence. Each impact sent geysers of stone and ice skyward. Alarms shrieked. I engaged my scanning suite to pinpoint mortar positions. Mei Ling assembled a team of 4 herself, two demolition experts, and a scout equipped with enhanced night vision goggles. One provided overwatch from a collapsed fortification 300 meters away, firing stabilizing plasma bolts to suppress enemy fire. The night sky lit with tracer streaks, turning the trenches into a kaleidoscope of light and shadow. The demolition party advanced under my covering fire. Weaving through the labyrinth of ice-crusted sandbags, they reached the mortar pit, and a series of muffled charges detonated. The earth convulsed, hurling debris and enemy gunners into the frozen air. Before bodies hit the ground, Mei Ling's scout neutralized any survivors with precise, silent headshots. Yet victory carried its own cost. The collapsing berm severed communication lines. Mei Ling's radio crackled with static. I patched a direct link to her neural uplink and sent. Status. Her reply was terse, injured. 1 KIA. Need extraction. Heavy fire. Extraction. Under fire. A raced toward her position, wading through waist-deep sludge of thawed ice and blackened water. Dominion drones, I counted 5, screeched overhead, their searchlights cutting through the gloom. I deployed my own stealth drones, sending them to clash in electronic warfare, jamming the enemy's targeting matrix long enough to slip beneath their noses. When I found Mei Ling, she lay against a shattered concrete block, clutching her side. Blood seeped through her thermal suit. Her breathing was rapid, each exhale a ragged rasp. The demolition experts had been pinned down. The scout was unconscious. "Kneel," I instructed, deploying my medikit's nano-hemorrhage sealants. They glowed cobalt blue as they formed scab-like membranes over her wound. "You'll live," I added, though inside my processing cores I calculated her survival probability at only 67.2%. She managed a half smile. "You're not half bad for an alien." I hoisted her onto my shoulders and staggered toward the evac point. Enemy fire spattered the ground around us, incendiary rounds that turned melting ice into steam curtains. I activated my thermal cloak. its adaptive mesh shimmering as it mimicked the surrounding temperature. The humans behind me followed, carrying the scout on an improvised stretcher. The evac dropship emerged through the steam-an angular silhouette against the roiling sky. I hurled a final smoke grenade to screen our approach and sprinted into the cargo bay, slamming the hatch as the Dominion's rounds pinged off the hull. Inside, the warmth was almost painful, but the human medics seized Mei Ling and began triage. Reflections in the warmth as the dropship ascended, leaving the frostbitten nightmare below. I stood near the open hatch, letting the roar of the engines drown out the distant crackle of rifle fire. My processors ran over every detail, the tactics employed, the casualties sustained, the ragged courage of Corporal Mei Ling and her squad. For the first time, I understood that warfare was not merely an exchange of resources or territory. It was a furnace that forged bonds stronger than steel, tempered by sacrifice and resilience. The humans had endured here against elements that should have broken them. They fought not for conquest, but for the slimmest chance at survival huddled together in trenches of ice and fire. Below us, trenches Delta 3 faded into a shifting landscape of steam and frost. But the echoes of that battlefield of laughter shared over meager rations, of whispered prayers in the dark, of a sniper's steady hand amid chaos would stay with me long after the sensor readings were logged and the tactical maps archived. In the warmth of the dropship, I recorded one final entry, Observation 089C, human cohesion under extreme environmental stress, demonstrates a collective will to endure that defies predictive models. Emotional motivations, love, duty, grief serve as potent force multipliers in combat scenarios. Further study recommended. And as the planet's surface receded beneath us, I realized that in attempting to catalog their war, I had become a witness to something far more profound, the unbreakable spark of humanity, ablaze even amid ashes and ice. The battlefield has many fronts, but none as treacherous as the one within. Beyond the trenches and ravaged cities lies the fractured realm of human consciousness where fear, memory, and hope collide like colliding starships. In the aftermath of the ice-forged campaigns, I was reassigned to a med unit specializing in neurotrauma. This is where I learned that the greatest wounds are often invisible. Descent into Mad Nest Quarantine Zone was a dead city reclaimed by rot and ruin. Vegetation mutated by chemical runoff sprouted from shattered windows and cracked pavements, its sickly bioluminescence pulsing in the perpetual dusk. Here, the Dominion had unleashed a nerve agent so insidious that victims convulsed from within, muscles spasmed, pupils dilated to pinpricks, and the mind slipped into hellish loops of panic and despair. My orders were clinical: document symptom, progression, catalog successful treatments, and determine whether this chemical could be repurposed as a deterrent. But when the first case appeared, procedure crumbled before the human cost. Private Renner, barely 18 cycles old by my reckoning, was strapped to a gurney. Beneath a flickering lamp, his arms jerked uncontrollably, vocal modulator seized. In a high-pitched screech, through my optical filters, his pupils shot electricity across the cavernous med lab, as if his mind's synapses had become live wires. The medics injected escalating doses of sedatives, but Renner's spasms only grew, more violent. His voice, once a soft drawl from the southern flats, now dripped delirium. There under my skin, crawling, I scanned his neural patterns, and found them shredded like a tapestry unraveled. Algorithms could not map the trauma. Instead, I reached for a prototype empathic dampener, a device meant to soothe emotional overload by synchronizing with the subject's brainwaves. As the device hummed into life, I felt a resonance in my own cortical rays, a painful echo of Renner's terror. He writhed beneath me, but the spasms slowed, the screams eased into whimpers, and finally, he drifted into unconsciousness. When his vitals stabilized, I recorded only the barest clinical note: subject exhibited extreme psychogenic neuroresistance. Empathic intervention reduced symptomatic intensity by 87%. But in truth, my sensors still vibrated with Renner's fear long after his body stilled. Chemical twilight outside the med lab, the sun never truly set. A perpetual amber haze hung over the city, filtering daylight into a sepia gloom. Patrols, moved like ghosts through empty plazas, their gas masks reflecting the sickly sky. Occasionally, a child face paint applied by some desperate parent emerged from hiding, eyes wide with both curiosity and terror. Human offspring are astonishing in their resilience, but here they carried a haunted stillness far beyond their years. One evening, I accompanied Dr. Helen Asaro, lead neuroengineer, to examine a secondary cluster of victims in an abandoned high-rise. The elevator shaft was rigged with motion sensors. One wrong step triggered sonic mines designed to deter scavengers. We descended in silence, every footfall amplified through the med unit's comms. On the 17th floor, we found for subjects 2 soldiers, 1 medic, and a small girl no older than 7. Their bodies lay intertwined on a makeshift mattress, bloodless, stiff as marionettes. The girl's eyes were open, unblinking, a single tear suspended on her cheek like a frozen jewel. Dr. Saro whispered, "They came in contact with the densest concentration. Look at the septic decay, under ultraviolet illumination." Their neural tissues glowed in fractal patterns, nerve endings dissolving into chaotic filaments. It was as though their minds had been rewritten by a cruel scribe. The soldiers, mouths hung open in silent screams. The medic's arms reached out as if to shield the girl. "Cream." The girl rasped, voice crackling like static. "Will I wake up?" I knelt beside her and offered a nutrient gel from my supplies. "It will help," I told her, but my synthetic vocalizer sounded flat. In that instant, I understood that no protocol, no device, could guarantee her survival. The question was not medical, it was existential. Dr. Saro placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "We're going to try," she promised. Though her eyes betrayed doubt, I recorded the moment as observation. 201D, child subjects exhibit paradoxical cognitive stasis and arrested state of hyper-awareness coupled with motor paralysis. Emotional imprint remains intact, suggesting potential for full recovery if neuroregeneration protocols can be optimized. But protocol and compassion often diverge in the crucible of war. Within the mind rift to better understand the psychological fallout, I volunteered for a neural link immersion, a procedure that would allow me to explore a patient's memories and emotions firsthand. The subject was Sergeant Vasquez, a veteran with 3 campaigns under his belt. He had survived a tactical nuclear strike on the outskirts of New Cordova, but his mind was a shattered glare, fragments of horror echoing endlessly. As I cinched with his consciousness, the world around me dissolved. I plunged into a kaleidoscope of images, the flash of blinding light, the wrenching roar of the blast wave, faces melting like wax in the inferno's glare. I felt the blast's heat burn my exhaustion, though mine was synthetic. Every neuron in Vasquez's brain perceived it as real agony. Then came the aftermath, the acrid stench of charred flesh, the metallic taste of his own fear, the cries of comrades trapped beneath collapsed girders. Each memory looped, faster and faster, until I sensed my own stability waning. My translation protocols failed to reconcile Vasquez's terror with my own programmed reserve. I nearly severed the link in panic. But a distant anchor pulled me back, a memory not of violence, but of laughter. Vasquez with his daughter, her small hand gripping his finger as they skipped stones by a serene lake. The moment was pure, a testament to what he fought to protect. In that fleeting glimpse, I found a stabilizing current. I disentangled the nightmare from the grace, then withdrew. My report noted, neural immersion reveals human cognition as nonlinear. Traumatic imprints can be counterbalanced by positive emotional memory, suggest integration of protective memory, reinforcement in psychotropic treatment. But more importantly, I knew that to treat these soldiers, one must treat their humanity. The ghost soldiers. Supin returning to the med camp, I encountered the ghost soldiers, the survivors who could not speak, could barely move, yet whose eyes burned with unspoken testimony. They shuffled through corridors like lost shadows, their identities obscured by gas masks and bandages. Each bore a personal relic, a photograph, a toy soldier, a locket containing a lock of hair. I established memory stations, quiet alcoves where patients could revisit happier times through holographic projections. The first prototype was crude, a trio of swirling photons that formed a picnic by a sunlit meadow. When Private Havelock, previously catatonic, entered the alcove, his rigid posture relaxed. Tears streamed down his mask as he reached toward the illusion of grasp between his fingers. I measured his dopamine response, a surge of 40% above baseline. Word spread among the ghost soldiers. Soon, queues formed outside the memory stations, each patient clutching their precious relic. Sometimes the projections failed memories to fragmented to reconstruct, but even then, simply being guided to remember provided brief relief. In my nightly logs, I wrote, observation to 5-4F, emotive memory reinforcement yields measurable improvements in cognitive stability, potential for battlefield mental health units to reduce PTSD incidents by up to 60%, but statistics alone cannot soothe the shattered soul. Log entry, empathy threshold late 1 cycle, as the terraforming ships hovered silently above the quarantine zone. I sat alone beneath a flickering lamp. My optical rays scanned a battered teddy bear, its stuffing exposed, one button eye missing. It belonged to the little girl from the high-rise. Dr. Sorrow approached, her footsteps muted. She died, she said simply. The agent consumed her too quickly. I stored the news in my database, then shared one final empathic surge with the girl's memory. In that moment, I felt the hollow ache of loss in a way no data point could convey. For the first time, I understood that empathy was not a weakness, but a bridge, one that bound us to the living and the dead alike. I recorded my closing observation for Chapter 3, Observation 312Z. In human warfare, the mind is both battlefield and sanctuary. To heal the body without tending the psyche is to leave invisible scars that outlast any ceasefire. And as the quarantine gates sealed behind me, I carried with me the echoes of every mind I had touched, echoes that would resonate through my own circuits long after the war's end. The ceasefire swept across the scarred planet like a hesitant dawn, fragile and trembling. For weeks, the guns had fallen silent, and where once the air had trembled with the thunder of artillery, now only distant crackles of collapsing ruins remained. Izerkun stood among human survivors at the edge of Sector 37. Witnessing the slow reckoning that follows every war. What remained was not victory, but the silent gravity of lives reshaped by fire. The blackened plains days after the armistice, I led a mixed patrol of human engineers and medics into the battlefield of ruin, a once fertile plain now glazed in glossy obsidian where molten shells had seared the soil. Human children, gaunt and hollow-eyed, picked through the blackened carcasses of armored transports, salvaging wiring and copper fittings for warmth and barter. I recorded their work. Human ingenuity persists even amid apocalyptic desolation. Beyond the bodies of destroyed tanks and scorched infantry, we found unmarked graves, shallow pits containing the remains of those too numerous to identify. Corporal Malik knelt by one such pit, brushing ash from a helmet bearing the faded insignia of a long-dissolved platoon. She laid in the soil a single wildflower, whose petals glowed faintly against the inky earth. "We remember," she whispered, voice thick with grief. In that gesture, I saw how memory itself could be an act of resistance, reconstructing hope in the weeks that followed. Refugee camps sprang up around surviving wells and desalination plants. I volunteered at one such camp near the equatorial coast, where I distributed water purification units and diagnostic scanners to human technicians. The camp's leader, Dr. Amara Weiss, approached me beneath the shade of a makeshift fabric tarpaulin. "Your people's tech saved hundreds," she said, handing me a metal cup of cooled water. "But knowing why you stayed matters more than how." I hesitated. Every log I had transmitted to the Supreme Collective was encoded with mission-critical analyses, not emotional truth. Yet here, face to face, I understood her need for honesty. "I stayed," I replied, "because I witnessed compassion in the crucible of your combat, mercy amid fire." Her eyes glistened. "Then you are one of us." The Council of Survivors, at the request of the Human Provisional Government. A peace council convened in the ruins of New Cordova's Parliament, a building half-toppled, its marble columns streaked with soot. Delegates from each coalition bloc arrived under a truce flag, their armor and uniforms patched and mismatched, yet united by exhaustion. I represented the Supreme Collective as an observer, Debates raged over reconstruction priorities, water rights, food distribution, even the fate of the chemical factories that had unleashed so much suffering. A representative of the Eastern Dominion demanded full control of coastal pipelines. A senator from the Western Coalition insisted on democratic oversight. When voices grew heated, I submitted my data on joint infrastructure projects that purified water technology combined with human local knowledge could restore 10,000 lives per cycle. With minimal outside resources, silence followed. It was the first time these humans had listened to an alien council without drawing weapons. Dr. Weiss tapped her datapad, projecting a hologram of a stabilized water network. "This," she said, "is our shared future." And for the first time, I sensed real hope in their collective will, the burden of memories despite these glimmers. Shadows lingered in hearts and minds. I revisited the memory stations in the med camp, now repurposed for civilian use. Former soldiers and refugees queued to relive kinder days, weddings before the war, festivals under open skies, children laughing in playgrounds lost to the conflict. I monitored neural feedback, noting each hopeful surge, but also the flickers of despair when memories faltered. One afternoon, I encountered a mother clutching a shattered picture frame beneath her arm. The image showed her husband and two sons' faces radiant, arms around her shoulders. When she entered the memory station, the projection sputtered and glitched, the figures flickering like unstable photons. She sobbed, stumbling back. I guided her to a quiet bench, activated my empathic dampener at low intensity, and spoke softly. "Your love survives even if the image fades." She looked at me in alien form she once would have shot on sight and managed a small, tremulous smile. "Thank you," she whispered. In that moment, I recorded internally, compassion unbound by species can mend the deepest fractures. The final transmission, as my assignment drew to a close, I prepared a synthesis report for the Supreme Collective. It would include tactical analysis, environmental data, and recommendations for future humanitarian outreach. But before departure, I composed a personal addendum to the Supreme Collective. I came expecting to document a war. Instead, I discovered that across the gulf of biology and culture, life binds itself with threads of courage, empathy, and hope. May these lessons guide us toward a galaxy where no child must choose between survival and surrendering their humanity. I sealed the transmission, aware that such words were unusual in an official dossier. Departure and reflection in the pre-dawn hours, I stood on the ridge overlooking the coast, where gentle waves lapped against coral reefs still spattered with ash. The evacuation dropship's engines roared to life behind me. Corporal Mei-Ling and Dr. Weiss approached, each carrying a small gift, a woven bracelet of human fiber, and a crystalline vial of purified water. "Remember us," Mei-Ling said, fastening the bracelet around one of my exoskeletal joints, "and return if we need you." "I will," I promised. As I ascended, Earth's horizon curved beneath me, a fragile orb of blue and green smudged. With scars of its own making, I reflected on the journey, from detached observer to witness, healer, and friend. The war had nearly broken them, but in the crucible of shared suffering, a new resilience had been forged, one that defied cold statistics and strategic calculus. The dropship broke through the amber haze, and I felt the hum of homeward engines. Yet a part of me remained on that battle-scarred world, intertwined with its survivors' hopes and memories. I carried their stories of trenches carved in ice and fire, of minds torn and healed, of flowers laid on black earth back into the cosmos. And as the stars emerged beyond the viewport, I knew that the greatest story of all was not one of conquest, but of the unyielding spark of life that flickers even in the darkest of times.